So this is not going to be a very talky talk. Dan and I thought it would be really sort of important and cool to give like the artist talk that you like never get to hear. So we're going to talk pretty informally about our backgrounds, how we got to this sort of weird place that we're at. Dan is an artist and does some curatorial work. I'm absolutely not an artist. I also do some curatorial work, and I'm a writer, just all around administrator. And we were talking earlier, and there's just so many parallels between like an artist hustle and an administrator's hustle that aren't always transparent. So we wanted to talk a little bit about our backgrounds, how we know each other, how we both got to this place, and then also talk a little bit about past projects in the context of like, let's talk about failure, and let's talk about collaborations and how those came to happen. Let's talk about moments where we've had to like be a waitress or whatever because things weren't going the way that we all hope they're going to go when we graduate. We thought it'd be really cool to be transparent about the art world as it is and the various like avenues there are to being a professional practicing artist and administrator. And so we're just going to talk, and thanks for being here. If you have questions, and put them in the chat. I think we can try to sort of handle that as you say them, but there will be Q&A at the end if you want to hold it. So yeah, hey Dan.
Hi Ashley. I'm so glad you just did our intro.
Woo!
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe Ashley, if you want to tell us a little bit about your history of like school and whatnot, and then I'll talk a little bit about my history as well.
Yeah. Who am I? How'd I get here? Thanks for asking, Dan.
No problem.
So I'm an independent curator and an arts writer. I've been working as an arts administrator in the professionalized art world for about 10 years. That's about how long ago I graduated from grad school. I grew up in Texas. I went to a small private school in Texas for undergrad, sort of not knowing what I wanted to do and what was gonna come out of that. So I got a BA in art history and also a generalized BFA, where I went to school. If you were pulling a double major, that half of it was studio. You didn't have to declare a medium or concentration. It was just like a generalized studio. So I came out of undergrad with this sort of double BA in art history and BFA. And then I was like, now what? The avenues that were available seemed to be, well, I wasn't a good artist. So like, let's say that I had this self-awareness to be like, this isn't going anywhere. So I had to decide then, like, what am I gonna do? And I ended up applying to like a bunch of crazy graduate programs, just like, I guess I'll see where I get in, and that will decide what I do or what's next. I knew I didn't want to teach. Joke's on me, because here I am, everyone. So I knew I didn't want to teach, and so I didn't want to. I applied to art history PhDs, and I got into them, but I felt like that was going to sort of lambast me into teaching or working in a museum, which I didn't necessarily want to do. So I landed in a curatorial practice program. I went to CCA in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and went through the 2-year CURP program. That's what it's called, CURP. Not knowing what that was gonna be either. I had a mentor in undergrad who actually is a Bay Area artist named Libby Black. Some folks might know Libby. But Libby had like a very brief, weird tenure where I went to undergrad in Texas, and really took me aside and was like, you don't have to be here. Like, you don't have to stay here. I went to undergrad in Texas because I didn't have the self-confidence to like spread my wings beyond like the environment that I grew up in. And so in undergrad, I had this teacher, this studio teacher, who was like, you don't have to stay here. and really encouraged me to like apply to really far-flung programs, and I did, and it was awesome, and I got into a bunch. I got into like an aesthetics and politics program. I applied to all sorts of weird stuff, having no clue what I was gonna do. But I went to CCA, got my curatorial to practice degree, and in the past 10 years, I've worked in like every kind of arts institution you can think of. I've worked in commercial galleries, I've worked at artist residency programs, I've curated university spaces, and then now, as of July, I'm in full-time higher ed. I do not have a full-time arts job. For the first time in 10 years, that's kind of like not where all my energy is, which also feels weird, but we can talk more about that later after you tell us what your path has been. Where are you at?
I have so many questions for you. I just have to tell you that right now. I have them written down and I'm going to be asking them shortly. So I was born and raised in Florida, South Florida. There are people from there. And I went to undergrad in Atlanta at Atlanta College of Art. Actually, I was gonna either go to Atlanta College of Art or Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia. And I opted for Atlanta because it was more of a city as ish, and it wasn't Savannah, and it was a cooler city for me, but also the school was a mentor-based school, a mentorship-based school. So I was really interested in that kind of education, and the school started, basically a group of women started this art school, and then so I majored in video, and I got a BFA in video, and I minored in art history and photography. And little did I know that years later, after I moved to Chicago, Savannah College of Art and Design would buy that school. So now it's their Atlanta location, there was a lot of contention around that transition because it transitioned out of sort of the ethos of the original school, but that's a different story. So yeah, I got out of school and I went to undergrad at a time where it was like, I literally was one of two femme presenting people in video. And if you made video, you didn't make photo. And thanks, Austin. I love Atlanta too. It's got a soft spot in my heart. And so I came out sort of doing a bunch of different things, and I continually got, oh, you know, what's that dumb saying, the master of none crap. And I moved to Chicago because I had no family in Chicago, and I have a bunch of family in New York, and I was like, I don't want to be near my family. Yes, thank you, jack of all trades, Scott. And so I couldn't get a job in video to save my life, and the straw that broke the camel's back, got that saying right, was when a dude in an interview asked me to lift a 90-pound crate to see if I could, even though the job was for editing. I was like, no, dude, I'm not gonna lift that crate for you. I'm going. And so I had a good friend who was like, you know, you can get a job in photo. Why not try to do that? And so I got a job assisting at a catalog house in photo, making very, very little money, moving carpets, making room scenes. And I worked there for 5 years. And interestingly enough, so I worked my way up to being a tabletop photographer, digital photographer. And this is one of the first digital studios in Chicago. And they were testing, which this sort of comes up later in my work. So I basically learned digital at a time that it was transitioning. And they were, part of the catalog house was using analog and the other half was using digital. And so I was doing both. And they were actually testing an 8x10 camera for Kodak, a digital camera, on a camera with bellows on a track. And that I end up revisiting that. I really didn't think about that when I started this other project, but then I realized that people get seasonal depression. I was like, oh, that's a thing. And when you work in a catalog house, you work in the dark, turns out. And so I was like, I gotta figure this out. And so I then started getting location work. And I worked for Better Homes and Gardens for 5 years. I started out assisting and then ended up photographing, and was photographing in the Midwest. And we would drive 3 hours. We had like a kind of area in the Midwest, and we would drive 3 to 4 hours, try and beat the sunrise in our high time of year, and photograph interiors and the gardens. So that was the thing. And we worked in a small team, and I learned a ton of stuff, and it ended up shaping those two experiences. And it was some time between from when I went to undergrad and grad school. Those two experiences ended up really, really shaping who I am and how I think about my practice even now. And then I felt like I learned as much as I could, and all along the way I was still making work, making video installations, making photographs. I built 2 darkrooms in the homes that I lived in, and just had a hustle and was like, I want to make stuff, and this is the only way I'm going to be able to do it. And you live somewhere long enough, you develop community, and I had a lot of different communities in Chicago. At that point, I was there for a really long time, and I decided that I wanted to go to grad school where I lived because of the people that I knew. Because so much of my work I was figuring out was collaborative, and that I was really interested in working with other people. And so I went to University of Chicago for grad school, and I really felt like I went at a time where I was like, I'm gonna suck that institution dry, and I got as much as I could out of it. And I learned a ton, and then stayed in Chicago after I graduated, and I feel like I'm meandering. And then I was waitressing all throughout. I worked at a French restaurant in Chicago that I opened. I loved that restaurant. I loved waitressing. I always felt like my best self as a waitress, because I learned so much. That and the catalog house and Better Homes and Gardens, those 3 things, I learned a ton about people. And yeah, so then there was Columbia College Chicago was one of the only places in the city where they hired staff. So I got a job as a video, as a new media tech. And I was like, okay, my plan, I'm gonna work there for a year, and then I'm gonna make them hire me to teach a video class. And that's what I did. And what's that?
That's what you do. You make them give you a job.
Yeah. So, yeah. And then shortly thereafter, like a year later, I got hired in a tenure track position at one of the city colleges in Chicago, where I taught there for 5 years. I led the new media division, built 2 dark rooms, and built curriculum. Was one of the main faculty that developed the diversity and inclusion committee, because there wasn't one. And then thought I was going to lose my mind because I was working too much. Sorry, I'm going too much. And then I'll tell you how I got to Seattle in a little bit.
Yeah. So for anyone who's feeling a little lost about why we both just talked our heads off about how we got here, the point is it's a meandering path, like for all of us. And I think that that's really important for students to know, to not be under the illusion that you're going to graduate from school and it's just going to be a straight line to that Guggenheim Fellowship. It's not quite where it works. I love that you worked at Better Homes and Gardens more than I love almost any fact that I know about you. When I was in grad school, in the Bay Area, all the photo grads, I feel like all supported themselves working at kink.com, which is hysterical.
Yes.
Like literally all the photo grads from CCA during the era that I was there made ends meet, like color correcting porn. Just because that was like the biggest employer of people that had like technical photo and video knowledge in the Bay in that moment, which is really funny. I personally have had so many incredibly strange jobs. But to your point about how much you learned at Better Homes and Gardens, like these jobs actually somehow informed what I do and how I think on a huge level. Most of the times that I have been completely unemployed in any sort of arts capacity, I've been employed in retail, doing floor sets. If anyone doesn't know what a floor set is, it's like literally how things are organized within a store to like trick the body, trick the consumer into following like certain paths around the store and like purchasing certain things. And so I have worked in retail a lot in my down moments, thinking about space and thinking about how people move through it and how to have folks like navigate certain avenues of space and how to like, where do I need to, what sort of window display does this need to be? Where do I need to hang this banner to make someone like super interested in this mundane thing? And so even though it was like, good God,
Fascinating.
I need to get out of here, it also was like taught me so much about space and how people move through it and like what is this. And it's funny because something that we talked about a lot in grad school in my CURT program is that one of the earliest sorts of thinking about moving through space in this way that curatorial history is really founded closely off of is Piggly Wiggly, the grocery store. The person that like invented Piggly Wiggly or owned Piggly Wiggly, the grocery store, was one of the first folks to do to make grocery stores aisled. So you know how like old-timey grocery stores, it was just like a guy behind a counter and then like pretty much everything was behind him. Like if any of you are Southern, like an old-timey like store situation, you go in and you're like, I need milk, and then the guy like goes back and like gets you your milk or stuff you asked for. Mr. Piggly Wiggly dude was like, I can make folks buy more if my shop is aisled. So it was kind of like IKEA. You know how in IKEA you're trapped? Like you have to like follow the whole thing. Like you almost have to walk through the whole store to get out and get what you need. Piggly Wiggly was like that because he was like, if I can control how people move through the space, I can control what sort of interactions they have with the product and the things on the wall, and they'll buy more. Because if you're forced to walk by a candy bar, you're going to be like, I need that, even if that's not what you came for. So really interesting that curatorial history like takes from this moment in thinking through making exhibitions and how people move through space. And so I had these like stank ass jobs that I absolutely hated, and that I was working like 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. because you do that stuff when the store is closed. So I literally was like a little night troll with my art degree, trying to like make money. And that's how I made money for years. In between jobs, I would like put my tail between my legs and go get another visual merchandising job. But it taught me so much and was so informative to my practice as an arts administrator and a space maker, and thinking through how to like get people to come to programs and like move through space and stuff. So super meandering path for both of us, but like interesting that we both got a lot out of those moments that like inform our other work. And I think as artists, that's like how it goes. We all take from other things to like feed them in this other context, and like it informs our work in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I'm super interested in, I had no idea that you worked in like visual merchandising, floor design. Did you have like full control?
Maybe. No.
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 Okay.
This is someone's, you get a floor set book, which is a binder that's like this thick, literally, that has come down from above about like what product is trying to be pushed in that seasonal moment. And so there's someone at like whatever corporate that puts together this floor set book and it gets sent to the store. The one place you have control is that every store is different. Like architecturally, every store is not the same. I worked at Gap doing this for years, and I worked at Williams-Sonoma doing this for years. So like, buy this copper pot. My favorite thing was there was this one poster that I had to hang that was like these beautiful little like copper mugs, and the poster had hot chocolate in them. And I was like, oh my God, because it's gonna burn your face off. You can't drink hot chocolate out of a copper mug. Are you crazy? But I was constantly having to like, just go with it and like entice people to like move through the space and like buy these really crazy things. And it informs the way I think about space a lot.
Yeah, I feel like Better Homes and Gardens, like, and waitressing, well, and the catalog house, like I learned how to sort of read my environment, and I feel like I learned consent, right? Thinking about like the edges of what someone wants or doesn't want, because sometimes people don't use words when they talk about what they want and what they don't want. In like Better Homes and Gardens was super interesting because we were going inside of people's homes. And we had so many weird, bizarre experiences because a lot of folks thought that it was like 1985 and you just come in and you photograph and everybody's glamorous, and it was so not glamorous. We were hauling equipment in. I was tired as hell. You know, it's just, shit wasn't cute. And, but it was always really interesting because you developed really kind of close relationships with the homeowners, and you ended up telling stories, and it ended up being a really interesting, funny time. If any of you want to hear any stories, there are so many, I can't even tell you. But I was going to ask you, Ashley, given this sort of transition or back and forth from like retail work to curatorial gigs, can you talk a little bit about like any of your community and like developing relationships with folks, and any kind of way you want to answer that, and then maybe if that led to any collaborations or if that led to any work?
Yeah. I'll make my answer to this really quick because it's just something that I like to say to grad students. My biggest network is my grad school network. Folks that we were all coming up at the same time and all sort of like in the same place trying to do and make and hustle. As the years have gone on since graduation, we're all, even if we're not in touch like that, we're all really, really good about saying each other's names. Like when I get solicited to do something that I can't do or that I'm not interested in, I try to be really, really good at being like, that's not my thing. Like, I'm not interested in that, but do you know who is? And then I like have this Rolodex of like an artist that I know from graduate school, or like another curator that I know from graduate school. I'm not in that city. I have no clue what's going on in Detroit, but you know who does? This person. So super, super valuable to like hang on to your folks from this time in your life. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, be nice to your cohort. And keep up with them afterwards, because it ends up just being like crazy valuable. And I have that question for you as well, because you've had a lot of really cool, interesting collaborators that I'd love for you to talk about.
Yeah, I would answer the same. I loved my cohort in grad school, and we all pushed each other. There was like a spirit of like support that allowed for really candid conversations, but also the same, like if I couldn't do something, I would refer a friend and refer a friend. I ended up working on a project with one of, you know, my ride or dies from grad school for 10 years. And it ended up being a really amazing project that started out collaborating, pairing artists for a series of exhibitions between Chicago and Havana. And then it grew to over 80 participants around the globe. And that was my buddy in grad school, Marilyn Volkmann. And then a bunch of other friends from grad school participated in it. And then, yeah, so that project wouldn't have happened if that relationship wasn't formed in grad school. We went on actually, this is a good segue to the next question, or the next thought. A project that failed.
Yes, we love a failure story. Tell me about a project that failed and sort of what the issue was and what happened.
So, and this is an extension. This is what happened with that project. So the project's called Arte no es fácil, and it's art. It's loosely translated to art is not easy. You wouldn't necessarily say that in Spanish. You say that in English, but you kind of wouldn't. And we liked the idea that it was this thing that was like in between language, especially because the project started out in such a way that people were paired for a series of exhibitions in Chicago and often translating emails. But it started very, very, very initially where in grad school, one of my mentors, Tanya Reguera, I studied with her. She had a school in Havana called Arte de Conducta. And it was for 7 years, people would come from all over and study with her. And the year that the government asked her to institutionalize her school was the year that she stopped. And so the Havana Biennial asked her if she would participate in the exhibitions that year. And she said, I'll only participate if my students can participate. And so there was a series of 9 nights of exhibitions with all of her students. And every night was a different group of students. And they would install, there would be an opening, and then they would shut it down, and then they would deinstall, and then it would start all over again. So we went to, there were several of us that were interested in going and experiencing those exhibitions. And we couldn't, because of the nature of sort of Tanya's sort of, this was under the Bush administration's policies, though Obama had come into office. We couldn't go necessarily saying that we were going to participate in what Tanya was doing. So we figured this out. We were going to make a film, and we were going to make a film on the biennial. And so the Havana Biennial is the first of its kind of that region to really show the work of artists from the Caribbean and Latin America. And it was in 1984, it's the first biennial. And so we decided we're gonna make a film, we're gonna interview people. It's gonna be a documentary, it's gonna be great. There was 8 of us, 3 art historians, 4 artists, and it was a nightmare. In that we all like I ended up, myself and Marilyn ended up being the primary people behind the camera, but we devised a plan that didn't include us. We did the thing that you don't do, which was objectify people in front of a camera. And so we came back, and Marilyn and I were editing this thing, and we were like, we're not in this. It was terrible. It was awful, awful, awful. And we did the thing that you don't do. And so it was like a year after, and people were dropping like flies. Nobody else wanted to work on this. There were fights. It was madness. And Marilyn and I were out to karaoke one night, and we both were like, we should go back into that footage, because we ended up documenting all of the emerging artists that participated in Artes et Conducta. We documented their exhibitions. We were like, you know what? We should go back into that material and edit documentation for those artists and figure out a way to get it to them. And then in doing that, it was this thing where we're like, oh my God, what would it look like if Carlos Martial were to like hang with Eric Wenzel's work? We started pairing people, and then we did it for like several different artists as we're like editing their work together to get them documentation of their work. Because also, you know, resources are really hard to come by, you know, and so a lot of artists, it's really tricky to get good documentation of your work, right? So there was an application that we applied to for residency with Lynx Hall in Chicago, and we're like, you know what? We're going to go back. We're going to get these artists their documentation, because we couldn't mail it because there's no mail system that was going to get it there. We were learning as we went, and then next thing you know, this project evolved where we met with a group of artists and talked to them about working with other artists that were based in Chicago, and it just then took off and became a really amazing project that at the base core was about collaboration, but also about so much. We learned so much around the histories between the United States and Cuba. Growing up in South Florida, for me, I had a very particular understanding of Cuba's history, because all my buddies were the kids of the parents who left as of the revolution in 1957. And so this project did a lot of things, and one of which was all of the friends and people that I've met give a different oral history around that.
Yeah.
So
that's a project that like turned into something else completely.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I think is so valuable. Like, we're in our studios, we're doing stuff, or we have ideas for things that we're gung-ho to manifest, and then for this, that, or the other reason, it just feels like a disaster. Not at all what we wanted or what we were trying to do. And that's like super dope that you were able to turn it into like a completely different thing. And I think that happens all the time. Like, that happens more than artists talk about, that the finish points for their projects were not at all anything like the starting points. And that's life. That's how this hustle goes, I think.
Yeah, and that the going back to the work and like not scrapping it and not thinking that it was like lost time, or not, like, there was something really valuable for us to say to each other, you know what, let's go back into the footage. That seems really important, and we need to do, that was urgent. And, you know, we didn't completely know, you know, what it was yet, but it became that. Do you have a project that you feel like had this kind of trajectory of like failure and then sort of maybe changing, shape-shifting into something else, or kind of an understanding of your practice?
Yeah. Everything I do turns into something else. I think that's just like the nature of being a curator, is that like I have these ideas for things that I want to do, but then as soon as I start like actually talking to artists, it always becomes something else. Like I approach artists thinking that the exhibition is going to be this really amazing commentary on this, that, and the other thing, but like not only am I working with artists that are living, breathing people, but their practices are too. So sometimes it's like they have a completely different thought or idea about what that work is about, or how it can live, or like what that would ever look like in the space of an exhibition or a public program. And I love when that happens. Like it changes for me, like the breadth of whatever it is that we were working on. So a lot of things turn into other things for me, almost always. And I also have a ton of failure stories. I made a biennial last year. I made the Portland Biennial last year with two collaborators, two really, really wonderful women, Yael Amir and Liz Johnson. And this came from a place of like, they could not, I'm not sure if they knew what they were doing. I think Blake would say that she knew what she was doing, but they could not have invited three people that are less interested in biennials to curate a biennial, which is kind of a bold choice. So we were asked to make this biennial, and we all three are like deeply suspect of biennials and like what their value is, what they purport to do, how they live within the communities that they're embedded within. And just particularly for this biennial, because it's the Portland Biennial, it's an Oregon Biennial. It should not be called the Portland Biennial. It's called that because it happens in Portland, but it's an Oregon Biennial. It's Oregon artists, which is very Portland, to be very insular and regional and like want to do a biennial of and by itself. So we were asked to curate this biennial, not just any biennial, but like a weird one. A weird regional biennial of all things. So we were like, let's really just like turn everything people want biennials to be on its head. And it's something that I'm still thinking about and trying to recover from, frankly. We did what we set out to do. We made a very not biennial, and we just got like the polls of responses. People either were like, this is radical and great and like just really super dope. We love thinking about like what else a biennial can be than other than like a shiny, glossy showing of like static commercial gallery stuff by like the best known artists whose names we already know. We love that this is not that. And then we got the other end of the spectrum that was like, what the hell is this? And it's something that I'm still thinking a lot about and like trying to decide if I feel like that was a success or a failure. And like, maybe you just don't know. Like I may never decide if that was a success or a failure. If I can share my screen really quickly, I'm just gonna like do like some quick photos of what this was so I can explain why this was like a very not biennial. Here we go, yo. All right, cool. So this is, let me start at the beginning. Ooh. Help. Okay. Where did I go? Maybe not. Let's do it like this. Old school. Yes, I want to open 40 items. Help me. So the Portland Biennial in part was curated, not curated, but contextualized by children, which was something that people either loved or hated. These are some install photos from the biennial. There were 18 artists in it. Some of them were names that people know already from around the regional art scene, but a lot of them weren't. That was because we took special care to include primarily non-white artists. There were some white artists in the show. We weren't being like that about it. But we really wanted to like take care to include artists that had not been included in past biennials. Like we took a lot of pride in that. We took a lot of pride in people who were in this biennial not having been in the past ones, because one thing we noticed was that it was just like the same names cropping up over and over and over. So we had, we took a lot of care to include a lot of Indigenous artists, because we're in a region that has a really healthy, wealthy history of indigeneity and native diaspora, forced diaspora. But we have a lot of native artists here in Portland and in Oregon doing really incredible, thoughtful stuff. And they had sort of somehow been omitted from past biennials. So there were a lot of native artists in the show, queer artists, Black artists, lots of Asian, South Asian artists. Just thinking about or like bumping up against the notion that Portland is just like the white epicenter of the universe. I think on some level that's obviously true. It's very, very white in Portland in particular, but there are like healthy, vibrant communities of color that exist in Portland and in Oregon that just really are like passed over or not included. So we did a bunch of work around the history of Oregon and making those things transparent. If you were at Slide Slam, I talked about the catalog we made as being sort of like a truly insane textbook. But we talked a lot to like immigrant communities and communities that have had forced diaspora, and it was cool and I was proud of it. I was really proud of it until it opened and folks were like, what is this? What am I looking at? I've never heard of any of these folks. And sort of the piece de resistance was this. So the Harriet Tubman Center for Expanded Curatorial Practice is a collective of middle schoolers at Harriet Tubman Middle School here in Portland. And what we did was that Harriet Tubman Middle School and the King School, which is in North Portland, both have a large Black population that's been like displaced from North Portland largely, but there's still a lot of families hanging in there. It's not a well-funded school. They don't have much of an arts program. So we thought, how cool to have these, a cohort of students from Tubman sort of co-curate with us. And so they didn't curate anything. They didn't choose the artists, but what they did was that they were sort of our little buddies in the process. They came along on studio visits. They came along on studio visits. They got to be there for install and like see some of the decisions and even just like how things are put together. But their biggest role was that they wrote the didactics for the exhibition. So this was like the main wall text that was on the wall. And it says, hello and welcome to the 2019 Portland Biennial. A biennial is an exhibition that takes place every 2 years. We are the Harriet Tubman Center for Expanded Curatorial Practice, a group of 7th graders from Harriet Tubman Middle School who work with 2 PSU professors to learn about contemporary art and curation. We were selected for the biennial and are participating by writing this statement. The wall labels for the exhibition, conducting interviews with artists for the catalog, and presenting a public panel to talk about our experiences. We're really grateful for this opportunity to share our perspectives with you. The curator said they wanted fresh perspectives from different types of people, and perhaps this is why they picked us. You don't normally have a group of 7th graders doing something like this. When you think art, people usually assume color, crayons, paintings, but the creations the artists put in this biennial will be more of a thrill. Are you wondering why? Well, because this is not your ordinary art show where all the artists are doing expected things. Though all the artists live and work in the state of Oregon, they have different inspirations, styles, and backgrounds. All of them have been especially selected to make sure this biennial is the very best. The colonization of indigenous land, migration stories, environmental issues, and gentrification are all topics that come up in a variety of ways in the exhibition. Those experiences should be thoroughly exposed in more parts of our society. We hope their exhibition informs you about Portland and Oregon through experiencing the artists and their artwork that the curators brought together. The 18 artists, including us, show what we think of the region and its history through their creativity. So, how do I stop sharing? Let's see. Oh, I'm not sharing anymore. Yeah. So by and large, people were like, what the hell did I just walk into? Like, I don't understand why I don't understand why the wall didactics are like, this guy paints, it's dope. We went to his studio and we learned these things about him. Enjoy his work. Because that really is what a lot of the wall labels were. I enjoyed that because I hate a label. I just hate it. I hate wall didactics, and that's just a me thing. But yeah, lots of people were just like, what is this? And I felt like I let people down. I felt like I let down the community that was really looking forward to the biennial. It had been 3 years since the last biennial instead of 2. That's like another story. But it had like long been like, people were waiting on this biennial, and then we did what we did, and I was really proud of it up until the moment that it opened and people were like, what is this? And then I just was like, whoa, like I let this community down that really was looking forward to like seeing this work by regional artists. I let the artists down because some of them didn't feel like their work was contextualized in the way that they wanted it to be. Like they wanted like a curator ass wall label and like a real like academic explanation of what their work was. And we let children do it. And some of the artists were like really frustrated. They knew children were doing the labels, but they didn't read them before. So once some of the artists read them, they were like really sort of frustrated by what the children wrote. I was bummed that there wasn't like more of a sense of humor about them being children. And as an artist, you can never like fully control what the experience of your work is. And so I think a 12-year-old being like, I don't get it is fine and funny and whatever. They didn't insult anyone in these labels, but it just like the whole thing, there's so much to say about the biennial and the way that it came together, but like the whole thing, despite how excited I was to plan it, despite how excited I was when it opened, the whole thing just felt really deflating afterwards in the way that people perceived it and they didn't like it. And it's something that I'm still thinking about. I don't know that it's gonna change the way that I make exhibitions, like sorry, not sorry, but like it's something to think about, and it shapes your practice when something just like completely does not go how you thought it was gonna go. And I think we've all had that experience of like bringing something out of the lab, bringing something out of the studio, and then being like, at like the way that it's ultimately like perceived or the way that it ultimately lives in public. And that's like, that's tough. That's how it is. I feel like we're running out of time, so I'm looking if there's any last things that we want to talk about. Is there a moment that you want to talk about that's like a lesson you've learned or like a moment of friction with an administrator or someone that you were working with on a project that you like learned a lot from or that just didn't go the way that you thought?
Is there, I'm trying to think. Yes. I don't have any images around that though. Maybe I'll answer that in terms of just to give you all some images. So the project that I've been working on for the last few years, well, no, I think this answers that. Part of that project has been to work with Creative Justice, which is an arts organization in Seattle that works with youth that are embroiled in the criminal justice system. And the project started out where it started out thinking through space and the architecture of space and light and shadow. And so I needed to start thinking about bodies that were inside the space. And so I live like 3 blocks from the youth jail, and the one that they've been building since 2012 that's now up and running. And so I reached out to Creative Justice because I heard that they work with youth that are involved that are in some way involved with that place. And so maybe I'll just show you some images real quick. I'm like, I'll show some I gotta share my screen. Sorry, hold on.
You can't fumble more than me.
No, I just did. Okay, hold on here.
Two
I guess
very capable computer people.
I guess how I want to choose to sort of answer that would be that I was very surprised by so at first I reached out to them to work on a series of photograms with the youth, and I worked with them for a quarter, and we made some amazing pieces. And I first reached out to, because in that first residency, I was going to have a show at the end of that year, which was the culmination of that year-long research. And after working with them for a quarter, I was like, I invited them to have work in my show, and I was like, what am I doing? They don't need to have a show in my show. They need to have their own damn show. And it was like a big moment of awareness where I then went back to the curator, Molly Mack, at the Hedreen, and was like, hey, what do you think about Creative Justice having an exhibition there? And she was like, oh, that could happen. And so we then started conversations around shifting their work out of my work and into their own exhibition. And so this is an image from their exhibition, and where we did a series of portraits at community dinners, where we then later made videos out of them, where the youth would photograph and then ask one person to be removed and then take another photograph. And we made videos that are literalizations of that shift of one person leaving the family unit. So, and this would be another image of that. So it really, I'll stop sharing. So I guess my way I'm answering that is that, like, it completely shifted sort of the nature of the work that I was making, and so I could remove myself from it. And I think as an artist, and especially, and for me, you know, it also enabled me that this project, I've been able to start talking about the many people in my life who have been incarcerated. And but this wasn't, they needed their own show. And so I think as an artist, thinking about when you need to get out, right? And it was a shift out of what the curator had thought, and the whole thing changed. So yeah, it wasn't, and she was very amenable to it and was totally down with it. But it was a shift.
Yeah, I think that's a good, thinking about when to get out of the way as an artist or administrator is really cool. When to, like, give the reins over to someone else in service of, like, the things that you're interested in as an artist and a curator or maker is always really cool and challenging, but also, like, bumpy. because you're accountable to like how that goes. But when it works out, like that's just the best feeling ever, when you're able to like have some out of the box collaborators and like do some things that shake up the way that arts institutions work, and shake up what people are expecting to do and feel and see when they come see an artist's work or come see an exhibition. So thanks for sharing that. It's 6:03, so I think probably we should take questions pretty soon. But for anyone who doesn't know, Dan and I know each other outside Zoom Square. We're buddies. We've never made anything together, but someday we probably will. Dan has been in Seattle until recently. I am in Portland, so we're just down the road from each other. But Dan's mobile. Dan's all over the place. You are where right now, and you're going where next?
I am in Indianapolis now, and I'm probably going to be in New York. I'm definitely going to be in New York later next month. But I should say, it's important to note that I would not have had the opportunity to meet all the amazing people at Sierra Nevada and like be here even in this conversation if it weren't for Ashley recommending me and my work to Julie and Russell. And
that's
so
how it works. You say each other's names, right? And then that's how like the whole thing moves, especially this program. I'm here because of my best friend Logie, who loves when I say Logie. I met Logan and Spaya Ferguson, shout out Spaya, who we wish was here and we miss very much, in Canada. I was in residency at the Banff Centre, just being nosy, walking around studios that I wasn't supposed to, and Spaya's here. And I met Spaya in a woman's studio, this woman, Alma Vischer. I met Spaya, in Banff, at the Banff Centre. And then I don't really remember what happened next, but probably 6 months to a year later, I had an email saying, do you teach? And I was like, nah, but here I am anyway. So say each other's names, be a network. That's how all this moves. We lift each other up, we get each other jobs, we collaborate. Huge part of being in an arts ecosystem that works is like lifting each other up and being buddies and like caring about each other's practices. So thanks, Dan, for coming.
Oh, thanks for chatting, Ashley.
Are you ready to take some questions? If any,
I'm ready.
Questions? How do we do this? Y'all want to say questions, or is Anza going to moderate some questions? Our camera's coming back.
We can do whatever people feel like. You can turn your cameras back on and jump in with your voice, or you can pop your question in the comment box. We've got a couple in there.
Oh yeah, I see a Karen question and a Feedsy's question. We can do
Scott Oliver question.
Oh, Scott Oliver's question. Should we take it from the top? Dan, as we're talking about meandering paths, how are you adapting to COVID and uncertainty in our world?
I mean, for me, like, I'm thinking about it in relationship to my work a lot, thinking about folks that are incarcerated and also facing life sentences that they hadn't anticipated because of COVID and because of the lack of safety. No, it's this thing of taking care of oneself and then thinking about how you take care of other people. Yeah, maybe. What about you?
Yeah, my work in this moment has just gotten hardcore administrative. I've spent the past few days reading COVID relief grants, sifting through that stuff, trying to get people resources and connect them to mutual aid. So in this moment, I've really recessed from being an administrator who works on programs to being an administrator that works on resources. And I'm really grateful for all the granting and mutual aid that's going on, but I think that's how my practice has changed for sure. I'm in like a really nuts and bolts place around artist support that has nothing to do with exhibitions or being in physical space the way it did even just months ago. So everything looks different for everyone, I think.
Yeah, I will say that, like, employment, you know, I lost 2 classes. I applied for unemployment. I got COVID funding from one of the Artist Trust Fund, COVID in Seattle, which has its own problems. But also I, you know, holding contemporary in Portland. Iris, are you still here? Iris Williamson and Tiffany Harker, the co-directors, and they've been doing similar things as you, Ashley, where they've supported, you know, filling out applications for my work to be sold. I had a happy hour where I talked about my practice. So I do think that there are very, very, very special people and entities in the world, like you, Ashley, that are thinking about how do we support the work that we want to see right now during a really, really hard time. Yeah.
Scott Oliver has a question. I love hearing about the process of making work and also how one's life and career path is meandering and intertwined with that process. I wonder how you think about the products of that process. Like, do they capture the process in a satisfactory way, or are they separate things? If not, what about that gap or tension? What do you think? Separate for you? One thing for you?
I mean, I think part of it is figuring out what it is in that moment, right? Especially when you're collaborating with people, especially when your work deals with representation, people in your images or not. So I think for me, part of the work is like, what am I responsible to in this relationship first? And is everybody on board with that? And maybe the work doesn't completely show everything that happened because maybe it's not supposed to, because maybe I need to take care of the people involved. I have been aware of that very thing throughout my practice. Very early on with the project in Cuba, where we were we were collaborating with a lot of artists that were blacklisted. And so there were points at which stakes were really high where we couldn't list them, but we included them. And then, you know, then thinking about the youth within creative justice, right? How important it is that these relationships stay intact and grow, and trust is huge, and you can't extort and extract from relationships, right? So I think it's negotiating it every time.
I think it's an easier question for me as an administrator. Like, my work on its face very overtly has to do with processes and structures and like behind the scenes stuff. So for me, it's like very seamlessly one thing, right? Like even work that I've done that's not overtly or explicitly arts work, still gives me a lot of information about like being a human being and what sort of ecosystem I want to live and work in. And so like one pretty seamlessly informs the other for me in ways that I feel like are pretty transparent or overt. But again, that's because I'm not an artist. Like, artists have to make decisions about like what to make transparent in their process and what not to. But for me, I feel like it's all the same thing. And Scott's also asking me about something that I wrote not that long ago called I Don't Like Art. I actually did write it a little while ago, but it just got published a week or two ago. I don't know how much we like care to talk about that, but I wrote something about the failures of the art world and how I'm just like in this moment where I don't know how much I care about art right now. Like, I care about artists for sure. I care about I think I said something in there about, for me, art has always been like a convenient gathering site for all manner of thinkers, divergent thinkers and makers and generative people and creative problem solvers and, you know, writers and critics and observationists. And like, for me, art is just a container for that sort of being in the world and that sort of mode of thinking and production and ecosystem building and future thinking. So I care about artists tremendously, and I care about making a place, an ecosystem where art is possible. But in terms of art, like the products of it, like the objects that come out of art, and like, I don't know how much I care about any of that right now. Maybe I never did. I don't know. That's not like a great thing to say as someone who's trying to like have a job in art. But yeah, I don't know. I'm so deeply invested in like the nascent process of art making, like the thinking and the tinkering and like I'm not so concerned with like what comes out of that so much as like creating space where that moment is valued. And people can like be given the resources to think. So yeah, I wrote a really grouchy thing called I Don't Like Art. And what I meant by that was like, especially in this moment, I don't know how much I care about like stuff, like the object-based detritus of art. But I do love art. It was a provocative title. I hope that's an okay answer. Let's see. Any other
frustration feels like, I mean, I take that to mean as someone, as a maker, like, now more than ever, like, it's not a product-based thing, right? And so if you make stuff and you make objects, you know, yeah, they could be in the world, but it's also that middle process becomes and is like more important than ever. And so I would say I'm less interested in the art market ethos and like, but also artists need to sell work to support themselves right now. Yeah. So, you know, I have a good friend who is at the Smart Museum. She's a curator, art historian. Her name's Leslie Wilson. And she had a hand in that collection, collecting new works of artists of color. And like those artists got fat checks right now. So I think that like that process of what you can do becomes really important. And it's not necessarily the end product, right? Yeah.
And also, like, I think it's really important, especially for young artists, like, you don't live and die on the value of, like, the stuff that you made. You know what I mean? Like, yes, there is potential to, like, make a living off the sale of art objects, and some very lucky people do that. But if you're not someone that graduates and, like, immediately gets a commercial gallery that wants to an excellent thousands of dollars a pop, that says literally nothing about the value of what you're doing. And I want all young artists to know that, like, the value of what you're doing is not at all tied up in that part of the game or that part of the ecosystem. So if you can sell things, cool. If you can't, you can get on my train of like not being into the stuff, and we can all get banned from the internet together. Anyone else have any questions? I think we did them all from the chat. Cool. Thanks y'all for hanging in there an extra 17 fat ones. I appreciate it.
Thank you all so much for attending. And just what we did last night is just like give some love to Ashley and Dan and just say thank you so much. That was awesome. Again, we've got some more public programs. Oh, sorry, Ashley, go for it.
You said we didn't talk about claws. Go watch a show called Claws
Okay.
and learn about it.
Niecy Nash. Watch it.
Huge formative value for both of our practices. Claws.
Seriously.
About nail
Seriously.
protection in South Florida. Go get inspired.
Yeah. Villain named Uncle Daddy.
Sorry, Enzo. Thank you.
Of course, thank you. And
Thank you so much.
yeah, this was awesome. We've got more public programs this week, and I'm going to bounce it to Logan next to kind of wrap us out.
Thanks everyone for coming. For those of you that want to stick around after the show and continue to have conversations, we will be closing this Zoom meeting. However, there are some jump-in chat rooms that you can join. If you're not in the program, you can find those on our website by going to the big orange button or following this link that I just pasted into the chat. And there's 3 public rooms there using jump-in chat. If you're in the program, you can use that link, or you can also find those links in purple in our daily schedule document. That's all I got.
That's it. Thank you all so much. We'll catch you at the next one.
Y'all are great.